Well, 7/7 has a nice ring to it, but it was a grim and terrifying day. 16 years ago this Wednesday, 52 Londoners set off for their daily commute and never returned home. 700 more were injured. They were the victims of a series of coordinated attacks on London that between them amounted to the UK's deadliest terrorist incident since the 1988 bombing of a Pan-American jet over Lockerbie. I'm joined from Surrey now by Phillips, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Thanks very much for giving up some of your Sunday night for us. Remind us, first of all, some of us who are around, but explain to some of the younger members of the audience just how bad 7/7 was and how out of the blue it came.
Well, like most terrorist attacks, this did come out of the blue, and it was something that happened in central London, which was quite shocking at the time. And of course, it was also British people effectively attacking their own people in our city. And 4 people set off that morning to go and kill as many people as possible. And unfortunately, they were successful. And of course, this was mirrored and followed just a couple of weeks later with another attempt to do the same thing, which wasn't successful. But it did show that the police in the UK were behind the curve, really, with identifying and understanding the terrorist threat in the UK at the time.
It was very hard. It always is hard to sort of catch people before they've done something. But was the thinking at the time that an attack would be something dramatic? We had seen 2 planes flown into the Twin Towers in New York, and we were ready for something dramatic like that. This was a lot cruder, wasn't it? This was a lot closer to home. It was more elementary, but very, very deadly.
It was elementary, but it was also complicated in some forms, in that they made effectively high explosive out of commonly available materials that you can get in your local DIY shop. So it was a very sad moment, but also an eye opener. And funny enough, it was pretty much at exactly the same time that I took over my role as head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, and we realised just the nature of the threat and the difficulty we were going to have from stopping similar attacks across the UK. Because we were really in the dark, but also in a very difficult position because, of course, they were attacking and killing members of the public. And we'd always been used to, in the past, an organisation, the dissident, the IRA and others, that were really intent more on killing members of parliament, police and military. So it was a totally different threat, and that was something we had to face up to very quickly.
And how do you sum up what's happened since? Have we got even cruder, some attacks that we've seen in the last few years? There isn't even a sort of a conventional weapon, if you like. People have turned cars into weapons, or they've, grabbed a kitchen knife. To what extent is the nature of the threat always evolving, making it very hard for the police and the other authorities to keep ahead?
You're absolutely right. It's evolving, it's diffuse, and it's very, very complicated. But the key difference between then and now, really, is the internet. And the internet is a game changer. It's a game changer for terrorists and those people that want to do harm to it. But also, of course, it's got some good stuff around it as well. And particularly, police have diverted and stopped attacks through their ability to track and follow people. So we have got a different threat now. It's an evolving threat. It has gone simpler, and you're right, with the use of the cars and knives and things. And that's, to some extent, to a great extent, actually, their fear of getting caught if they buy explosives or they buy items that might be able to turn into bombs. And also, if they try to buy guns, they're convinced, and I think the police are better at stopping those types of offences. But I think the big danger here is that you just look backwards and think, well, that's what's happened before, so that's what's going to happen next time. And of course, the type of attack and the location that's attacked is very much the choice of the terrorists themselves. So we have got to stay alert and stay aware and understand that the threat's not going to go away in the near or medium future.
I know that Daisy and Inaya here want to come in shortly, but I just want to ask you one other one. Has the pandemic, has lockdown, has COVID helped shut down the terrorists, or has it just made them lie low for a little while? Because all those things that they need, like buying materials and moving across borders and even moving within, a city, has been that much harder. Have we had a sort of false respite, if you like? Are they now sort of all pent up, ready to get going again when we open up?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you just hit the nail on the head. It is a bit of a respite. And not being able to move. But also don't forget that the main target for terrorists is and has been crowded places. And those crowded places haven't existed. And of course, as you say, if you do purchase stuff on the internet, it does bring lots of dangers with it as well. So I think the terrorist threat is there. In fact, it's changed, and we've got much more of a right-wing terrorist problem now than we did 10 years ago. And the police will tell you they're working really hard. The security services are following a lot of people, and the threat is still there and very real. And just added to that as well is many of the people that we were arresting, just around the time of these attacks, are actually now back on the streets because they've been released by a courts into the public domain. And that's the last two terrorist attacks we've had have both been those. Yeah, they've been people that have been sentenced for terrorism and then been released. So we have, and the security services and the police have got a huge job to do. And of course, whenever an attack happens, they're always the fall guys to get the blame for it. But actually, there's other forces at work here, and the internet has created a whole new set of problems.
Chris, just on that point that you were making about convicted terrorists being released and reoffending, obviously we are talking about the policing bill later in the show, and I know that's a part of that, extending those sentences. But I just wanted to ask you a bit about Brexit, if you can bear it, because, of course, in the campaign and subsequently a lot was made about whether the people like yourself would lose some of the cooperation with your European contemporaries, that the Europol issues or the European arrest warrant would be adversely affected and we would be less secure. What's your position on that? Has any of that evolved?
Well, of course, the European arrest warrant was always a bit of an issue because that enabled the police to move much quicker and arrest people and get them deported across and through Europe. But generally, and I've listened to the head of MI5 and MI6 talk about this, they've got lots of ways of sharing information. In fact, the European Union rely on the Five Eyes, the UK as a major contributor to that, for their intelligence. The attacks that happened in Brussels a few years back, the UK were having to brief their own police forces, Belgium's own police forces, about what was happening and who'd done it, because they just weren't aware of what was going on in their own country. So, we've invested hugely in our security services, our intelligence services, and the UK leads on this, certainly in Europe. And of course, we've got the links to the Five Eyes. And as I said before, that's a really key part of the protection. And Europe, the EU, would miss that tremendously if they didn't have access to it. So it's a two-way street here. And I always heard the claims that we were doomed if Brexit happened, but of course that was never going to be the case, and it isn't.
Also, Chris, to what extent does greater powers for the security services actually help? I mean, I think after the 7/7 bombings, you saw a greater expansion of the modern surveillance state, and I kind of came of age at a time when there was a huge rise in the number of terror attacks, globally, from Charlie Hebdo to the Boston bombings to the horrendous terror attacks in Manchester. Do greater powers for the security services actually make a substantial difference, or is the problem fundamentally a socio-political one?
Well, both of those things, actually. There are certain powers that the police and security services have asked for, and I think largely they're getting. But actually, our criminal justice system is absolutely rubbish. And any criminal justice system that allows people that want to blow us up and kill us to do half a sentence and then back out onto the streets whilst they're still radicalised is just not protecting the people that it should be. But of course, there are certain laws as well that I really do welcome. And as a result of the terrible attack in Manchester, there is now a push for this Martin's Law, which is something actually very close to my heart, because I was talking about organisers of events and locations actually taking a bit more responsibility for training their people and actually putting in counter-terrorism response and protection measures as part of law many years ago. In fact, just shortly after these attacks on 7/7. So there's nothing new in this, but gradually, bit by bit, things are improving. I just hope Priti Patel follows through with her speeches about changing the sentencing policy. For me, someone that wants to is radicalised and wants to kill people should not be allowed back out into the streets. They should not. And we've got to find a way of keeping these people off the streets and in prisons, and make sure that the prisons does prevent radicalisation. And that's failed to happen over the last 20 years as well. Our prisons have been a hotbed for radicalising others.
Well, Chris, thanks very much for joining us. If Priti Patel was watching, and we know she is a bit of a fan of GB News, she'll have heard that loud and clear as the legislation comes into the Commons. It's a sobering reminder, isn't it? We've all been preoccupied with this one threat of one particular thing called COVID, with sort of good cause. But there's so many other things out there we've got to start thinking about once again, isn't it?
Yeah. Also, it's just extraordinary to think that was so long ago. I was interviewing Ian Blair just a few weeks ago, and he was the Met Commissioner at the time. I mean, not a job that anyone would want to have. And he was fascinating about it. Of course, he was heavily criticised because it was just after that Jean-Charles de Menezes was shot in, because they wrongly assumed he was the wrong guy, exactly. And he was shot at Stockwell Tube Station. But he was fascinated about that day and the chaos of that day. And his own son was caught up in it, and he was talking about that. And then he was talking about some of the bravery of the police and paramedics who arrived, the bus particularly, and the three tubes. And there was a microwave on one of the buses that they thought might be another bomb, and they went in and removed it. I mean, incredible individual stories of bravery that I think we've slightly forgotten about.
Yeah.
So much has happened since
There is
then.
a very, very, moving sort of sculpture in Hyde Park that I recommend to those who lost their lives on 7/7. And if you're ever in Hyde Park, wandering around central London, as you'll soon be allowed to do wherever you live at the moment, then I'd recommend that.